And welcome back. Well, I know it's been a while and I do apologize. We're still waiting for the short block to come back from the machine shop. I, however, did have a conversation with them just yesterday, as a matter of fact, and they promised me that by Tuesday or Wednesday of this upcoming week, we should have our short block back, and then we can begin the long anticipated build-up. But I do apologize for the delay in videos as such. So what I figured I would do is put at least a little bit something out there today. And what we're going to cover is another Banks add-on. I may have commented about this in the last video, but the reason why we went ahead and purchased this extra device, and we'll get into that here shortly, is that these are on sale right now, and at the time we purchased this, Banks extended the Black Friday promotional code. So we were able to get a fairly decent deal on what you see here, which is known as the pedal monster. Now, if you're unfamiliar with these, what they do is that they don't add performance to the vehicle per se. So let's get that straight here. So it's not going to do anything to the tuning or that of the vehicle. It's not going to give you additional horsepower. What it does, it plugs in line with your existing fuel pedal, gas pedal, however you want to call it. And in this case, this particular setup, as most newer vehicles are, the throttle is electronically controlled, meaning you may have also heard it called fly-by-wire. In other words, you push down on the accelerator, you're actually, I believe it's a potentiometer that you're adjusting, that is sending a specific signal to the PCM, and then the PCM as thus opens or closes the throttle plate on the throttle body according to the pedal input. What the pedal monster does is that it alters that signal so you have a faster response time to throttle input, as well as it will also adjust your throttle. So you may be let's say 2% down on the throttle, depending on how you have your settings set up. You could potentially be pushing, basically it'll change that value. It may be sending 3 or 4% to the PCM rather than the 2% that you're actually applying down into that throttle. And then what I say about a range is, and again, don't quote me on that, I'm just kind of throwing out some rough examples here. This pedal monster can be controlled via either Bluetooth on the phone, or in this case, since we have an iDash that we installed in the previous video, we're going to control this with our iDash. And as such, we can control different modes. They have a stock mode, which will just make the throttle act like it does from the manufacturer. You have a city mode, if I remember correctly, sport mode, and then a track mode, and then you have various levels of those modes, and we'll get into that when we get into programming the iDash and getting our pedal set up, because there's some calibration that we'll need to do to this once we're ready to start using this. So in this video, we're going to get this wired in to our existing Banks setup, and the particular wiring setup we're going to be using is that last picture you see there. If you remember, we have a with iDash and a Derringer, and this is actually Derringer / any of their sensor accessories. If you remember, we're going to have one of these type of 4-channel analog sensor accessories in the hood, and it's going to monitor fuel pressure, boost pressure, as well as transmission temp and differential temp. But what happens is this pedal monster is going to serve as a communications bridge between our 4-channel analog sensor and our iDash, and hopefully you can kind of see that there, that the pedal monster is then going to be run up to the iDash, and then the sensor array in which we've already have our cabling, which runs out to the engine compartment, is going to then plug in to our pedal monster. So basically the pedal monster becomes that gateway, as they call it. Now, what you see here that comes in the box is that you have a thank you sheet that has QR codes that get you to a quick start video and a quick start guide that you can download via your phone. It also came with a warning to remove before dealer visit. So they kind of want you to disconnect this before you go back to your dealer. Now, your mileage may vary. The Chrysler dealer I go to for a lot of work that needs to be done by the OEM is fairly good about me bringing my modified vehicles in. So far, they haven't had an issue with it. To give you a hint, the dealership I go to also owns NASCAR race teams. So again, they're pretty cool about bringing modified vehicles in. So I won't have to strip any of this out or reset anything back to factory. Obviously, as you've seen from the previous parts of this video series, this truck is being highly modified. So, you know, leaving this in for us shouldn't be an issue. But again, your mileage may vary. We've got some more bank stickers that come with the kit, some more tie wraps you can see there in the bag, and of course our B-bus cable, which is going to go between our pedal monster and our iDash unit. Now, since Banks was running a site-wide sale, and at the time they had extended the Black Friday promotion code, we went ahead and also picked up some additional 3-foot and 6-foot sensor extension cables. We'll use these when we get into running the sensors for the differential and the transmission. And we also picked up a little extension cable for that B-bus in case we need something to, you know, either a little bit longer than this going to the pedal monster, or if we need to extend the cable just a little bit, that's going to go to the 4-channel analog that's under the hood. We may or may not need this, but we went ahead and just picked one up while we were there. Now, I'll come back and kind of cover a little bit more of what you see here on the bench at the end of this video, but you can see that we're also kind of just stacking up parts here for an upgrade that will be done once the engine is in and we've completed our break-in. Then we're going to come back and do a little bit more work on the rear end that we were talking about in a previous video. We have 355 gears in the rear differential of this truck right now. We are going to change out to 410 gears. So you can see that we've got a ring and pinion kit here. We've got the, let me get these cables off the top of this box. You can see we've got an install kit. It comes with all new bearings, bearing races, pinion nut, crush sleeve, the whole 9 yards, the seal. And for the differential piece itself, we're going to go with an Eaton Detroit True Track. So instead of going as well as changing out to 410 gears in this truck, we're going to change out to something that will give us limited slip capability. The nice thing about the Eaton is that the way they handle it, it doesn't use clutch packs to pull this off. They use helical gear sets. As such, when we're putting the fluid back in the differential, we don't need limited slip fluid per Eaton for this diff when we complete the work. So we'll come back and we'll touch a little bit more on this kind of at the tail end of this video. But for now, what we need to do is that I'll bring you back when we're inside the truck, and we're going to take the trim panels and the A-pillar trim. Forgive the mess in the garage. I've got parts everywhere, as you can imagine right now. We're going to get this trim panel off, the bottom trim panel that we were playing with earlier, as well as this A-pillar trim off, so we can get access to this. As again, we need to remove that B-bus cable that currently goes from the iDash into the connector for the 4-channel analog and the hood of the vehicle. And we're going to see where we can best fit our pedal monster. And I'm hoping that there may or may not be enough slack in the cable. We may have to extend the bus cable depending, I don't know, it's, I was hoping that we could potentially put the pedal monster behind here and just rest it on top of the trailer brake controller, but we may not be able to. We'll have to just play it by ear when we get in here. So let me get some light and start tearing some of these panels off, and I'll bring you right back. One moment. And welcome back. So just if you remember from the previous video, what happens is we also have this single pod gauge adapter hooked in with our pillar trim. And if you remember, what happens here is that they give you a replacement Phillips screw that goes through all of this molding and then helps re-secure this. So basically you replace the, at least down here, the one bolt that comes with it. So you end up with a factory bolt here and the replacement Phillips screw here. So now we've got this all kind of disassembled from where it was at. We're just going to pull this piece off, wiggle that out of there. Yep, and as you remember, when we put this in, we fed quite a bit of slack, as you can see up there, so it allowed us to more easily do operations like this in the event that we ever had to disassemble this. We had plenty of ability to basically pull wire out and get behind here and unplug those connectors. So what we need to do, now that we have access to this, we need to get up underneath here, and you can see where our gas pedal connector is. Right here in our 1500, we got a single connector right there. And that is what we're going to loop our pedal monster into. And then we're going to have to decide, based on the amount of wiring that we have from the pedal, where we can best mount the pedal monster and then run our bus cabling. So let me go grab the pedal monster and just kind of see what we've got to play with as far as length of cable and spacing here. One moment. And welcome back. Let's forget the camera work here. But there's our pedal monster cabling, and don't worry, we'll get this all tie wrapped up and kind of pushed out of the way. But what I wanted to show you was that there actually was enough length in this stock cable that came with it that we were able to go above the steering wheel, and the section of the steering wheel that goes over, that doesn't rotate and it doesn't move. It's not going to collapse and bother the cable, but it keeps it up and out of the way of all our pedaling, allows us to come over here, and I'll get you a light in here so that you can see that. But hopefully you'll see our pedal monster actually can rest. There you go, right. There we go. You can see, kind of see that red label on that pedal monster sitting right down in there. So where it's sitting right now is on top of this trailer brake controller, where we kind of wanted to nestle it in. And we went ahead and also pulled down the B-bus cable out of our pillar trim here. Brought it down. This is the cable that goes out to the connector that will plug into the 4-channel analog adapter on the hood. So this is going to go into one side of the pedal monster connector, and out of the other side of the pedal monster, which this is a much longer cable than we need. We're going to have plenty of slack, but this is the cable that came with the kit. This is going to go on the other half of the pedal monster, come up and plug in the back of our iDash unit that you see here. So what I want to do is I'm going to probably, let me get that light out of your face, just come in here and I'm going to see how best I can get this pedal monster just to kind of secure itself to the top of our trailer brake controller. I may use just a small amount of double-sided tape just to kind of stick it in place, but before I do that, let me pull it down from inside of there. We'll complete the electrical connections and then we'll get it back up into place, but I want to show you that first. So one moment. And welcome back. Let me turn this light a little bit and get some of this glare out. Trying to get you some better light so you can see here. So this is our pedal monster, and those are the two connections we're looking at making. You can see that they're two 6-pin connectors, which are your B-bus, or I believe what's called your B-bus. Now it doesn't matter which side of this we go into for each piece based on what I can see from the directions. So we can just plug the cable that'll go up to the iDash into one, and the other cable, which is going to feed our 4-channel analog adapter that'll be in our hood. So as you can see, we've run our new 6-pin connector, our cable, which is the flat ribbon, one of the two flat ribbon cables you see here. We've run it up and through and got it kind of hanging out of our trim piece on top. So now we're just going to make our electrical connections here. What I want to do is get you set up on the tripod there. And what I'm going to do is just, again, just plug these in. They only go in one way. And from their orientation, at least as far as the way they terminate their equipment here, their data flow, it doesn't look like it matters much which side they go on. So that's the side that's going to go up to the iDash, and this is the side here that we pulled down that used to go to our iDash, but now it's going to go from our pedal commander, our pedal monster, to our 4-channel analog device in the hood again, that our sensors are going to hook up to. There we go. So we got them both in. They both clicked. So now what I'm going to do now is, since this goes out to the firewall, I'm going to pull the excess cable through, because the nice thing with doing this is it gave us a little bit of extra length to play with now that this isn't going all the way up to the iDash, now that it loops through our pedal monster. And I'm going to pull some slack of this cable through, kind of get things situated, get some tie wraps in here. But don't worry, I'll bring you back when we do the electrical connections on the gas pedal itself, or the accelerator pedal, however you want to call it. Now, what I'm going to use to secure the pedal monster to the top of that trailer brake controller that I was showing you, I've just got some of this 3M body panel double-sided tape. This stuff is relatively strong. Once we get that pressed in place, this isn't going to really go anywhere. Not easily, anyway. So let me do that. Let me get some slack pulled out of this cabling, and I'll bring you right back. One moment. And welcome back. So I just wanted to show you this on the back of this pedal monster. You've got your part number, your serial number, your looks like a PC number as well. What I'm going to do is when I put this piece of double-sided tape on, I'll show you here. It looks like you got a reset button is there. Well, on their tops, I don't want to cover any of that up to include that reset button. So I'm just going to put this piece of tape here at the very, very close top as I can get it. And I don't want to necessarily, I may put one more strip down here at the bottom, but I really think one strip of this is going to be enough to hold this in place. Like I said, this stuff is pretty strong. I really don't want to cover those numbers up. Now, one thing you can do, if you're going to be putting this into an area like mine where it's not necessarily easily accessible, you could just take a picture of that with your camera, so that way you've got all your numbers and know what your current firmware revision is. So I just want to show you that. I'm going to get this trimmed off, and we'll see if I can get this pressed in place. Because the reason why you've got a lot of these numbers on here, again, part number, serial number, obviously, is that, remember, this can be controlled via an app that you can download to your phone. Now, the nice thing about controlling this via an iDash rather than the app is that with the iDash, you can change the sensitivity, basically the pedal settings, kind of on the fly. Without having to pull the app up on the phone, change the settings, close out of the app. And, it allows you, while you're driving, provided that you're stopped and not in reverse, anything of that nature, to be able to just make those changes, at least in my opinion, much more conveniently through the iDash, since you kind of have the iDash, right there in your face, so to speak. Now, that's one thing I forgot to mention, and if you read on these, they do have safety measures built into this. In the event that this thing should register a hardware fault, what it does is it reverts to basically factory settings. So it'll kind of cut itself out of the loop. Pedal will go back to basically reacting like a factory pedal would. The nice thing is the power for this unit isn't leached off of the power of the circuit for the fuel pedal. It's being taken from the iDash, which in this case, for us, it'll be the iDash because we're connecting this to the iDash. But remember, the iDash gets its power from here, which is the splitter that we put in earlier for the OBD port. So again, it's nice. And after doing a little bit of research on this and looking at a couple of different products for how they handle this, Banks has put a lot of safety in mind when it comes to this, which you would expect when you're dealing with a device that can modify the behavior of your fuel pedal. So let me do that. Let me get this trimmed up and get this situated and see if I can get this pressed in place, and I'll bring you back. 1 minute. And welcome back. So I got you zoomed in here, and I've got our electrical connection to our pedal, factory OEM connector to our gas pedal disconnected at this point. It's just a push clip. You just push in at the top and it'll release. So what we need to do is hook in our pedal monster. And if you give you 2 connectors here, this is going to be the end that plugs into the factory harness here, and this will be the end that plugs into the pedal. So what we got to do is come up here. Well, once I can get it to line up. Oh, this is fun to do when you're working around the camera. There we go. So you can see that there. Hopefully you heard that click. We're going to push in the lock tab so it locks it in place. And then we're going to take the connector that's left, the other part of this Y connector, and we're going to loop this in to our factory harness. There we go. I don't know if you heard that click. I'll do that again for you. There we go. So I'm going to tie wrap this up a little bit just to keep it out of the way of a couple of items. But it looks pretty good where it's sitting as far as our wiring. You can see that we're not in the way of hitting anything with our foot. We now have our pedal monster looped in to our factory harness as well as our factory fuel pedal. And what we ended up doing over here is, and I'll bring you back on this, but yeah, let me pause and bring you back and I'll show you how we actually mounted the pedal monster. 1 moment. And welcome back. Hopefully this is in focus. It's cramped quarters when doing inside underneath dash work, but you can see that red strip of 3M tape. I actually didn't expose the adhesive. I left it on there as kind of a padding / protection measure, but it's just resting on top of that trailer brake controller, and it's the zip tie of the wire that you see right. Let me get you picked up here a little bit. Probably right there in the center of the screen. Due to the length of where we zipped it, it's doing a pretty good job of holding that pedal monster kind of right where we need it, and it's not allowing it to slide forward, which is good because it also keeps it out of the way. And the reason why I went back and kind of thought about that, and I don't want to stick that in place, is because of that reset button at the bottom of it. So in case we ever have to, let me turn the camera a little bit, hopefully you can see that a bit better. So in case we ever have to hit that reset button, then it's not stuck to the top of it and kind of cumbersome to get a hold of. We can kind of reach up in here. So you can see we get plenty of area to move it a little bit. and we can get to that reset button a lot easier if we need to. So let me get some more stuff wrapped up here and I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. So we got everything tidied up underneath. Got our cabling kind of tie wrapped out of the way of being able to hit it with anything mechanical or feet, anything of that nature. And we're just left with our two connections here, which we've made before. You've seen these in the other video. Those just go on the back of the iDash appropriately. So what we're going to do is get our iDash reinstalled here. We went ahead and put our A-pillar trim back in place and kind of pulled some slack through. So we'll get these connected. We'll kind of pull the slack that we're not going to need back through here and maybe store it up and push it down into here, just kind of store it up in here. And then we'll get our mounting hardware back on, which again, you get a replacement bottom screw for this one when you order this single pod cluster. And of course the top one is just your factory bolt. So let me work on getting this in place, back in place, and I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. So you can see that we've got our pillar put back in as long as our pod. And like I said in the last video, you've got that replacement Phillips screw that they give you with this that goes through all, it's longer, so it goes through all this material. If you're having trouble, I just want to reiterate this again, but if you're having trouble getting this bottom screw here to line up so it threads in, at least on this particular ram, that may be the same on yours as well, you see where this bottom piece of this gauge pod kind of pushes into this area and meets up with the bottom of the dash. And until this piece is flush with this dash piece you see here, this piece won't line up. This bolt hole, screw hole won't line up well enough for you to get that in place. So again, if you're having trouble with it, just check your alignment here on the side and that might help you out a bit. So we kind of took our excess and just pushed it back up in place on the side here because there's plenty of space on top of this area behind this vent. And then we'll get our side trim put back in. But one thing I wanted to show you was, remember, we now have excess cable that we push through for our B-bus. And you can see that now will go almost about halfway over across our engine compartment and meet up with our 4-channel analog adapter, which, yeah, almost all the way over. And I did buy a short extension cable for this, and I'll show that to you and get to that when we get to this section of the engine reinstall. But what I want to do is have that analog adapter kind of live somewhere in here, maybe even take their bracket possibly and attach it here or here, thread it into this threaded stud here or this unused bolt hole here, and just kind of have it hang out, because I wanted to have it on the same side as where the ECU was going to be. It can either be in two locations. I'd like to try it over here because this is where two of the hookups are going to be. We're going to have a fuel sensor here it's got to plug into, and a pressure sensor for the supercharger will also be on the left-hand side of the motor. So if we have to, we got enough play and enough extension harnesses that we could have it over here on the driver's side. But as you can see, we've got a pretty good amount of cable, a short extension cable on it, which I do have for this, will allow us to kind of nestle it maybe more in the corner, something along that nature. Again, we'll have to kind of play with final fitment when we get to, getting the engine done and getting it ready for reinstall. But as you can see, putting the pedal monster into an existing system that has an already existing iDash, from a wiring standpoint, it's pretty straightforward. It's the two connections that plug it into the pedal, and then the electrical connection that gets it into the iDash, and then of course the electrical connection, again in our case, that goes out to our 4-channel analog adapter again, which will be used for later for our settings. So the wiring is fairly straightforward. Now there's a couple things that we need to do. When we first power up the system, we'll have to get our Banks iDash set up and calibrated, and we'll also have to get our pedal sorry, I keep calling it commander. It's got stuck in my head. Pedal monster calibrated. And there's a little bit of a calibration routine. And basically what it has you do, obviously, key on, engine off, it has you push the throttle pedal all the way down to the floor and then come all the way back up. That way it can calibrate itself with the current range or output range of travel that corresponds with closed versus wide open throttle. Once it has that calibration done, we can get in here and set this screen up to display the pedal monster and then allow us to change the settings as far as, factory, city, highway, and then track, if I remember correctly. I'm sorry, sport and then track, if I remember correctly. There's 3 different modes in this. We'll be able to set all that up. We'll also be able to set it up where we can adjust our pedal monster on one side of the screen and then be able to see what will be our boost and fuel rail pressures on the other side of the screen. So that should be pretty cool once we can get all that set up. So the only thing left here is I might put one more. Actually, I don't think I will. I was thinking I might put one tie wrap right there just to kind of hold those in place, but I think they'll hold themselves in place just fine and not get into too much. I may strike that. Yeah, I may just put one tie wrap in there just to kind of help secure that so it doesn't bounce around on it, and then we'll go from there. But hopefully this video was helpful in that regard. I know you didn't get to see it in operation, but again, once we get the engine installed and we get to that point of it, we'll definitely come back and make a calibration / setup / use video and kind of go over those pieces. And coming back to what you see here on the bench, again, just kind of coming back to this, we're going to go from 355 gears in the rear differential to 410 gears in the rear differential. And you may be asking yourself, why 410? Why not 455 or 488, which was also available for our setup? And the reason why is this. I contacted the individual who we got the high stall torque converter from, who also is the individual who tests the cams from my tuner. And I got with him and said, hey, look, I want to change out the gears in the rear differential at some point. I'm looking at 410, but what do you suggest? Because, again, he builds and races these things for a living. And based on some input he got from me, such as we're going to be using this truck in city driving, highway driving, as well as track, because we're going to be using it for city and highway, we leaned more towards the 410 setup in the back rather than a 455 or 488. So the 410 should be a noticeable difference from the 355s that we're running now. We should be able to leave the line at a much more aggressive pace. But the reason why I don't want to do this yet, I want to get the engine in, get it running, make sure everything we've done thus far is good, get a little bit of break-in time, get a feel for how it reacts with the 355 gears, and then we'll come back and do a complete video series, the step-by-step on a 9 1/4 Chrysler ZF rear diff, changing from the open 355s to a limited slip 410. Excuse me, sorry. So I want to show you, we got that to come. You can also see that we have a spare set of not only bearings, pinion bearings, but we're going to go ahead and do axle bearings and axle seals while we're at it. Again, since we have to pull the axles, no better time, might as well go ahead and do axle seals and axle bearings while we're at it. We also picked up a spare set of pinion bearings. This kit comes with Timken bearings. So to keep everything the same, we picked up a spare set of pinion bearings, the main pinion bearing for an Antipkin as well. And the reason why is we're going to hone out a spare main pinion bearing. And what that's going to allow us to do is drop it in place as we shim that pinion. But then if we have to take that bearing off, since it can be a destructive process to remove a pinion bearing, we don't want to shim it, have the bearing pressed in place, need to remove it, destroy it, removing it, because we may have to alter the shim underneath. And this way, what it will allow us to do is, at least for mock-up, before we put our bearings on for real for the final time, we can slide the bearing off, change our shims, slide a bearing back on, check our fitment, check our pattern against all of our gears. And if everything looks good, then we can just easily slide that bearing back off again and then press the real one in place. So we'll be taking, again, that main pinion bearing, we'll be honing it out so it just kind of drops in place and won't be a snug fit. So it's going to be a purpose-built tool, if you want to call it that. While we're at it, and I believe this kit has one big enough that'll do it, we picked up a Lyle pinion bearing race driver set, which is the part number 59400 you see in the upper corner. We'll be giving that a go when we install the new races into the differential. Now, I've seen it done several different ways. I've seen individuals use the old race to drive in the new one. I've seen it done with a brass punch to drive it in. Both perfectly valid ways of doing this. But the kit was reasonably priced on Amazon, and it looks to have a driver big enough to fit the main race that we need, as well as the rear pinion race. So we'll be giving this a shot when we get to doing the install. So hopefully that was a little bit of an update for you. Gave you a little bit of content as well in relation to installing the Banks pedal monster. Again, it wasn't something that we were originally going to do right away, but since it was on sale and they were still having the Black Friday promotion on top of the sale at the time we ordered it, we figured, might as well take advantage of the opportunity and pick it up now, save ourselves some money rather than have to pay out a little bit more in the future. And no, this video, even though I know this is the second one in the series as far as Banks, it's not sponsored by Banks. They didn't give us anything free. This was paid for out of our own pockets. But with that being said, if you have not subbed, please consider to do so. Every little bit helps. We have exceeded the 1,800 member count at this point. I think we're fast approaching possibly 1,900 at this point. My apologies. I didn't look at the page before I started to do this outro, but if you have not subbed, please consider to do so. For everybody who has, I thank you immensely. And as soon as the engine shop calls, which is supposed to be Tuesday, I think they said Tuesday, possibly Wednesday of next week, once we get it back in here, we'll do a video. We'll review the work that they've done thus far, along with a couple of secret things I've been telling you about that we'll cover once it's completed. And then obviously we'll start cranking out the build videos on taking the short block to a long block and obviously getting it reinstalled back inside our vehicle. With that being said, I will bring you back for the next one. Thank you much. Bye.